Hello, I'm Dr. Desiree Eakin, and this video is Running on Empty: How Cortisol, Stress, and Burnout Affects Our Ability to Build Resilience. So, stress is such a hot topic. It's something that we can all relate to because, to one degree or another, we are all under stress just by living life. But especially if you are living life in a metropolitan area, you are constantly being bombarded with stress. And so, this video is going to explain what that stress is actually doing on our body and what can we do to improve. So, the main player when it comes to stress is cortisol. Cortisol is that hormone that gives our body its state of readiness. It's that fight or flight. It comes from the adrenal glands, which is a very small gland on top of our kidneys, and it has many, many functions. The number one function, I would say, is its ability to give us our energy source so that we can have that fight or flight response. We can respond to the threat, whether it be a physical threat or an emotional threat. So that increases our glucose in our bodies, so we have that energy, that fuel to be able to respond. It's our stress response. So it gives us that physical ability to stand up and fight or to run away. It's very important for sleep and for morning wakefulness, and we're going to go into this in detail in a moment. And what that does is it allows your body to get up in the morning, give you that energy that you need to get your day started, and helps carry you through the day, and then decreases at night so you can go to sleep and get restful, restorative sleep. It's very important in brain function, for attention, for short term, for adaptation and stress. It regulates our blood pressure, so it allows us to increase our blood pressure again so we can respond to that fight or flight. Cortisol is key when it comes to the immune system, so its response is an anti inflammatory response, so it decreases inflammation and immune signaling. It's helpful in metabolism and appetite. So it helps regulate our metabolism and keep our appetite under control. And then for that recovery feedback to help with the stress response and to turn itself back down. So, like I was saying, the cortisol rhythm. So, this is your cortisol awakening response. This is depictive of a normal curve. So, what happens in the morning when you wake? You should start to have a cortisol peak within about 30 minutes of wakening. Typically, this is occurring around 7 a.m. It can be by, some people by 6, by 7:30. Um, and this is what gives you that energy so I can get out. Helps with focus, with the blood sugar throughout the day. And then you can see that it's going to then start to decline right around lunchtime. It'll start to slowly decrease itself until the evening. And then when the sun starts to go down, your melatonin then should start to increase, as well as another hormone called growth hormone. And so the decrease in the cortisol helps you to kind of, okay, wind down from the day. And then that melatonin then starts to make you a little bit more sleepy. And then the growth hormone comes in, and that's your reparative hormone. So we talk about sleep a lot, and we know that sleep has huge impacts on brain, on metabolism, on immunity, on memory, on so many different things. And we know that if we don't get enough sleep, that's when it can increase our hemoglobin A1C, our insulin sensitivities. Decrease our insulin sensitivities, increase insulin resistance. So there's a difference between deep sleep and REM sleep. Deep sleep comes that first part of your sleep, and this is a slow wave. So what happens is the brain and body starts to slow itself down. The heart rate decreases, breathing slows, your blood pressure can also decrease, and the brain waves, that's why it's called slow wave sleep, kind of slows itself down. This type of sleep is your physical repair type of sleep. It happens in, like I said, in that first part of sleep. And you know you're in this one because if you are awakened abruptly from it, you're kind of that groggy, like it's like, whoa, what is going on? Where am I type of sleep. As opposed to rapid eye movement or REM sleep. The purpose of this is really more so for brain and cognition restoration and emotional restoration. So, this is where the brain actually becomes more active during this time period. This is where you can have vivid dreams, and your muscles seem paralyzed or are paralyzed during this period. And this is what happens right before that wake up of the cortisol in the mornings. So we used to say, when you were cramming for a test, you pull these all nighters and you would have you would be able to remember the material for the day of the testing, but shortly after that you forget everything that you had studied. And this is because you're not getting that effective REM sleep. You're not allowing the brain to then create those memories and work on that learning path. So um, and people who don't get enough REM sleep are the ones that usually say have the brain fog or just difficulty concentrating or focusing. So there's a difference between acute stress and chronic stress. So our bodies were designed to respond to stress. Some stress is good. It's important for our bodies to be exposed to that. But long-term stress is where we can get ourselves into trouble. Right? The old saying, "Too much of a good thing is never good." Well, that's very true when it comes to cortisol. So acute stress is more things like you're trying to meet a deadline for work, or packing for a trip, last minute packing for a trip, responding to danger, performing under pressure at work for a certain task, anything that's a short term challenge. Versus chronic stress, where this can be, a caregiving, stress from work, constant pressure at work, weeks of poor sleep, financial stress, relationship stress, under eating, so not taking in enough calories or dieting too hard, going below that basal metabolic rate. We will put your body into a stress state. Perfectionism, emotional labor, um, hormonal transition. So just perimenopausal time alone puts the body in a stress state. We're just always having to be on. So the body was designed to handle stress, but it wasn't made to live there. And this is what happens when to our cortisol when we have prolonged stress. So you can see in that number one there, that's that adaptive state. That's that acute stress phase where you have the initial increase in the cortisol from the morning, and then you encounter a stress during the day and you have that responsive spike in your cortisol, but then it goes back down and recovers itself by the evening, so then you can fall asleep. And you notice also that that spike is not greater than that initial morning spike. So that's also important. And then you have the next one there, which is number two. This is chronic stress. So now your body is seeing multiple stressors throughout the day and it's spiking multiple times. And you can see where the spikes are almost the same height as that morning response in the cortisol. And this is where you're starting to get yourself into trouble. Remember, the body likes homeostasis. It loves to be balanced, just like glucose. It loves to have a constant basal type of glucose throughout the day. You don't want to be spiking, having big meals and spiking your cortisol, spiking your glucose throughout the day. The same thing is for cortisol. And you can see where now over time you reach that blunted response. So now you have stress, but you can no longer respond to that stress appropriately. Your cortisol does not, first of all, it doesn't rise like it should in the morning. So you don't have the appropriate cortisol awakening response. You don't have the energy to get out of bed and start your day. You don't have the energy to get through your day because you are, a suboptimal there. And then you sort of kind of just still have that same level of cortisol in the evening. So you're going to have difficulty falling asleep. So, what that leads us to is this wired at the phase one to tired in phase two. So phase one is really this hyperfunction of what we call the hypothalamus pituitary axis. This is that wired state where you have the excess of cortisol present. You're often having anxiety, even maybe new anxiety that's showing up or worsening of current anxiety. You feel this hypervigilant state. Blood pressure can increase. And then that fat around the organs, that visceral fat, can start to develop. You can also have symptoms of depression or aggression. And then physically, it can also affect the bones as well. And very important is the effect on the immune system, because instead of adequately responding, you get this immune suppression. So you are not adequately responding to inflammation within the body. And over time, that's going to shift into the phase two, the hypofunctioning of that HPA axis, or we used to call this adrenal fatigue. This is now that tired state. Your battery is just on empty, no matter what you do, no matter how much caffeine you take, no matter how much glucose you try to intake, or that piece of chocolate to get you by. It's just not going to work. Your body is not going to respond, and that's because you've developed cortisol resistance. Just like you have insulin resistance, you can do the same thing with cortisol. And this is now going to have that blunted stress response. You can get chronic fatigue. Now, because of the immune system also being blunted, you can have muscle aches, pain, inflammation. You can trigger autoimmune diseases, new allergies that you've never had before. I mean, I can't. Um, I've lost count of how many people I've seen over this last year who've said, I never had an allergy to that. I never was sensitive to that. And now I am. And then you have just inflammation all over the body, both body and brain inflammation. And so, how is all of this showing up in the body? Well, we talked about the low energy. We talked about now difficulty sleeping. You have problems falling asleep and problems maintaining the sleep. You never get into that deep sleep. And so you are easily awakened. And how many people out there, it's like 3 a.m. and you are wide awake and cannot go back to sleep for the life of you. Mood swings, irritability, feeling on edge, anxiety that I talked about earlier, that brain fog, forgetfulness, appetite and blood sugar. So you start to crave sugary or salty foods, or you'll be, going through your day and it's like, oh my gosh, I just cannot, or I've eaten and, I finally made it to lunch. And if I could only have just get to lunch and I'm going to just be more awake after lunch, I just know it. And then you eat, and by golly, an hour later, either you're so exhausted where you're just like, oh, I could really take a nap right now, or you're like, wow, I am so hungry. Like, I cannot believe it's only been an hour since I ate. I've got to get something to eat. And again, that's because cortisol is out of whack and your insulin levels, because glucose is just fluctuating all crazy throughout the day. Body composition, this is where you'll start to say, I'm developing this pouch in my belly that I've never had before, and I've been working out like crazy, and I still can't get rid of it. And it's harder for me to do my workouts than I've done before. More muscle aches and pains that we talked about, and then its effect on the gut. A lot of research is coming out about the gut brain axis and how we have dysbiosis or dysregulation in the gut, and how that really affects our mood and our brain's ability for neuroplasticity and resilience and repair and cognition. So we're learning more and more about that. Also, its effect on the perimenopause and PMS symptoms as well. So what happens? Well, you end up getting burnout. And burnout happens when the demand on the body and mind exceeds its ability to recover. And this is what you will see many of the symptoms that we had talked about earlier, but even more so overlapping with depressive symptoms as well. It's more of just this detachment, loss of motivation, feeling ineffective, that fatigue, the lack of joy that you once had, and then just feeling of overwhelming with even the smallest of tasks. You just feel overwhelmed. Um, and I see many high achieving women will normalize burnout because they are used to carrying so much. And how many times do we hear, how I think we've come to equate being very busy and having a busy schedule with success. If you ask somebody, how's work? I say, oh my gosh, I'm so busy. I had so many patients today. I didn't even have time to take a break. I didn't even have time to go to the bathroom today. I was so busy. Versus, oh yeah, I saw 5 patients and, went home for lunch and got to take my kids to school this morning and pick them up. You know, we equate, right? Which one do we equate as being the more successful person there, right? Even though we could be making the same exact amount of money, the notion of being busy and having a packed schedule gives the illusion of being busy. And that's where we've come to sort of brainwash ourselves. And it's like, okay, we've got to take on more, because the more we take on, the more successful we are. And just look at the example of children today. I mean, we are putting our kids in as many extracurricular things that we possibly can. And we're keeping them so busy because that's going to make them so successful later on in life, right? And at what cost are we really doing to our system? So I think for me, the biggest revelation right now is cortisol's effect on the brain. We have imaging studies that have shown patients who have been having high levels of cortisol over long periods of time, this chronic cortisol exposure, it's actually shrinking the brain. And it's shrinking the area that is deep within the brain called the hippocampus, that is so important in memory, so important in cognition, and highly affected in Alzheimer's dementia. So this is giving us a huge clue into one of the biggest causes, right, for dementia, and something that we can actually mitigate this by decreasing our cortisol response. We can at least decrease that one that one potential contributing factor to the development of dementia. And when I say dementia, I am using it in a broad umbrella term. Of course, Alzheimer's dementia is its own type of dementia. And so this is more and more reason is that we need to be protecting our brain. We're so focused on strong bodies, and I say this all the time, but you can't have a strong body without a strong mind, just like you can't have a strong mind without a strong body. So they do go hand in hand. So we really, really need to be focusing on our brain health and our brain resilience and neuroplasticity, which you're going to hear me talk about in videos later on. So, how do you know when your cortisol is out of balance? Well, first and foremost, we go back to basics, and that's symptoms. What is your body telling us? Your body is signaling us through its symptoms that something is off, something is wrong, and we need to address it. These are not symptoms that are in your head. These are actual physical symptoms you are having, and they need to be addressed. And this is part of my look deeper method, my integrative medicine approach, this 360 evaluation of what is going on. So the four main areas are mind and body, aesthetics, and longevity. We want to look at all these areas because, again, you can't have one without the other. When it comes to the aesthetic side of it, we're not looking at to make you ageless. That's not the point of this. The point of looking at aesthetics is what is your outward appearance, your skin, the way you present yourself. What is that telling us about your inner wellness? And then we look at labs to then help guide us and set up a baseline so that way we can follow progress objectively as well. And also, to some labs then give us an insight into well, where is the issue at exactly? And there's no single lab that it's going to explain everything. It's looking at all of this in total. So we can specifically look at your cortisol levels. So what I will generally do is start off with just taking a lab, a blood draw, an early morning blood draw. So before 9 a.m., having you get to the lab and have your blood drawn and just checking for that morning cortisol to see, is it inappropriately low or is it inappropriately high? Or hopefully it is right in line where it should be for that morning peak. If that is abnormal, or I'm suspecting that although that is normal, you may not be having a normal cortisol response later on in the day, we can check multiple times throughout the day. That's usually done either by checking your urine or doing a saliva test. We don't need to poke you multiple times throughout the day to check your blood. And so that is a way that I can look deeper if necessary. And then another common one I do is that one there, that DHES, that's specifically looking at your adrenal gland and the health of your adrenal. And then we look at the electrolytes as well to make sure that your adrenals are responding appropriately and making your electrolytes as they should. That ACTH stimulation test, that's a very specific test that it's more of a specialty test. It's not that commonly done, and it's certainly not a routine test that would be ordered. So that's several steps down the line if needed. And then looking at your metabolic function, this goes hand in hand. So definitely I check fasting glucose and fasting insulin, and then a hemoglobin A1C to look for that insulin resistance and the onset of prediabetes or diabetes. Interestingly enough about that, I want to point out how important of it is to actually focus on this. And this is something that is a new concept for traditional medicine, and one that I had to also come to realize myself because we weren't traditionally taught to look at insulin levels. But now the studies are showing that if you are insulin resistant for about 10 years prior to the onset of type 2 diabetes. So if we can catch that insulin resistance within that 10 years and mitigate that, then for most people, they can actually decrease the onset of diabetes. So it is very crucial that we pay attention to our insulin levels. So then it's all about resilience. So how do we reset this the physiology and the mindset? Well, it's a three-step process. You want to respond to what is causing the stress, respond to what the body is trying to tell us, that's clues that it's giving us, and then we start the recovery mode. And then after the recovery, we can then return to balance and hopefully then be able to maintain that balance. So, the integrative medicine method for restoration is to support this stress response from multiple different angles. We're not trying to eliminate your stress response. We're trying to get you back to a normal stress response. And there's many different ways we do this. This is the here you see on the slide. This is the four typical categories, and you can see where none of these here mention medication. And we really should not, be looking for sleep aids or looking for a medication as our knee jerk reaction. We really should focus more on, natural responses, lifestyle modifications, nutrition, exercise, and then we can use supportive things like adaptogens to help support our adrenal glands. And you see, I have a few written in there that you can take a look at, but these are very specific to the individual. So I don't want everyone going out and buying ashwagandha or holy basil or rhodiola. These are very specific to what is going on within your system, and within your lifestyle. So you want to have an adaptogen that's appropriate for you, and that's why it's important that you meet with a healthcare professional that is knowledgeable in this area and can make recommendations specific for you. Gut brain support is so important. If you can do all of these other factors, but if you don't have a good gut, you're going to have a very difficult time getting your body into full restoration. We know there's this huge play, the mind gut axes, and how this really affects our brain's ability for mood, for adaptation, for resilience. And so getting that gut. So again, you don't want to go run out and start getting all the probiotics and prebiotics and short chain fatty acids. Again, you want to have and all these different supplements. That's not my hope for you at the end of this. It's to know that there are options out there that can help support the system, but you need to choose them wisely and in consultation with somebody who's very knowledgeable in it. And then the nervous system recovery. So when I was in training, this was sort of like kind of whatever, working. But I can tell you, having been researching this for the last several years now, how important this is for resetting the system. That whether it's breath work, whether it's yoga, whether it's meditation, whatever it makes sense for you, that's what we do. That's what we explore, and find something that helps you. Because remember, the nervous system at this point is just on overload. It is so sensitive, and it's like you're going to just snap at any moment with just the littlest thing that can happen. You can snap. And so we want to just kind of dampen down that response. And this is really where those things come into play. So the resilience reset, this is a great one to take a picture of. It's just sort of the overall view of overall map of what we want to do to help reset. So it's getting that restorative sleep, making sure that we're taking in the appropriate nutrition and getting vitamins. Like I said earlier, you don't want to run out and start buying all these different supplements. Really, our supplementation, our vitamins and minerals really should first and foremost come from nutrition, from our diet. And then if there's something there that we need extra of, maybe it's because of gut absorption or some, or lifestyle issue that you have that's preventing you from getting in those appropriate nourishments. For me, I'm not a huge fish fan, so I need to find other ways to get my omegas in. And if I can't, then I supplement for the omegas. So something like that. Movement, and interestingly enough, the recommendation is not to be doing, if your cortisol is so out of whack, to go and start doing high intensity training is actually not the best thing for you to do. Again, you want to have this overall calming effect. We want to increase circulation. We want to get movement in the body. It's very good, but we don't want to be overshooting it. That's not to say, don't do that, but let's start off and then you can work yourself back up into that. Because again, also with prolonged increase in cortisol, you can have workout recovery difficulty. So you put in this hard workout and your body has a really hard time being able to recover. So you're actually doing more harm than good. And then resetting the nervous system, we talked about having boundaries. There's going to be certain things that you just, and certain stressors that you're just not going to be able to get rid of, whether that's your caregiving for a family member, or you've got a child who has a very busy, hectic schedule. There's certain things that we're not going to be able to take the full stress away, but learning how we can adapt and mitigate those stresses. So I want to thank you so much for taking this time to be with me on this video. Just remember that your body is not failing you. I know that there are many people out there who know something is not right, and I hear it all the time. They go to their doctor and they get labs and they're told that they are normal. But remember, normal does not equal optimal. And remember that your body is communicating with you. These symptoms you're experiencing are real. It's a message to saying, something is off, help me. And when you understand these signals is when you can respond with deeper care, clarity, and support. So please listen to the symptoms, look deeper. If the doctor you're seeing is not looking deeper, find somebody that will take that extra look, because we want to support the whole person. Any questions, feel free to send an email. I am happy to answer them. And thank you again, and please take care.